Okay, so now we're going to go over how to import other data sets into Salesforce Einstein Discovery. So we've gone through the process of importing CSV files and Salesforce data sets. And then we're going to go through some of these other formats real quickly. Now, I don't have access to real live databases for Hadoop and others, but I wanted to show you some of the commonalities across these different types of connections that you can make. The general gist here is that for any sort of connection that you're wanting to enter in and make and connect between Einstein and another system, is you need to give it a name, and then these other fields are related to host and database, port, username, and password. And then you connect, and these will vary depending on the connection type. This is Hadoop, and then if it's MySQL, I actually could get a connection to MySQL. So I'll pause here in a minute and set that up so we can show and demonstrate that at least. Once again, the connection name, the host, the database, the port, the user, and the password. And then Netezza, that's an IBM database solution. I wasn't terribly familiar with them before looking into Einstein Discovery. Same song, different verse, the same sort of connections here. And so Oracle, there's an SID field, which is a little bit different than the others. And then for Postgres, same sort of screen, SAP, and then finally SQL Server. Now, I don't know if Salesforce is planning on adding additional database types to Einstein, but if there is some other system that you're trying to get data into Einstein, you can always export out to CSV and import that way. And I wanted to show a couple of websites that there's some really good data sets available on. And then on the tail end of this lecture, I'll show you how to do a MySQL connection. One particular website is data.gov or data.gov. This is for the United States, website related for that, but what you can do is you can go to data.gov. So I pulled up data.gov and did a search for .csv, and there's several data sets available with the .csv extension, like college scorecard, crimes, U.S. chronic disease indicators, and there's these different formats that these data sets are available in, and it shows federal, city, state, etc. And so you can get to CSV files very quickly through this site and then import them into Salesforce Einstein Discovery and then work with them from there. And so I just right click and then download link file, and that saves it to my downloads. I've not gone through and vetted all of these or any of these actually for what would make for a good data set from this particular site. But one other site that I want to make you aware of is data.world. And so this is an interesting site that I ran across in my search for good data sets. And this is basically a social network for data nerds. And I'm quickly becoming one as I get more and more familiar with Salesforce Einstein, and specifically as well Einstein Discovery. And in the creation of and the preparation of creating this course, I saw the need to have data sets available to me to demonstrate and make available to you as students that went beyond what was available through Salesforce Trailhead. Because the last thing I want to do is just sit and rehash what you can find readily available in Trailhead, but instead provide you with some useful resources that you can play around with some data. And so a couple of data sets that I found interesting personally, this first one, I'm going to copy this URL that I have. And so you'll need to create a user account here on data.world if you hope to follow along with this and do the actual steps. And you see here you can connect with me and follow me, and I've done my own test data set that's private, and there's some recent discussions and people that I'm either following or whatever. And one of these that we're going to look at is this Netflix shows, which is trending this week. Pretty cool data set, and I'm going to show that one here in a minute. But first, I want to paste in this URL for a data set on Data World. This is just raw crime data for the city of Denver, Colorado. And I just happened upon this one as a, I guess, good set of data because there's not an exorbitant amount of rows. And I also wanted to show you as well, let's say if we were to go back to the listing for a data set, you can actually click on the Explore button and then build a query. And so it's limiting this to 5,000 records. Now I'm going to expand that. So this is an SQL query or SQL query. and I'm keep wanting to say SQL query because that's the Salesforce object query language, and that's more what I deal with in my everyday life. But we're going to change this to 15,000 and then run the query, and we're going to test out if Einstein can handle beyond 10,000 rows. So we're running the query. And the reason I'm showing you this, and we're just trying to get to some data that you can then import into Einstein, and we'll look at this more in later sections of the course, but we want to get some more data sets into Einstein is the main thing. Now the power of this, beyond being able to see this inside of your browser, is you can actually export this to different formats. And so you can save the results as a CSV or an Excel file. You can copy a download URL, and as well, if you get into data science and artificial intelligence, coding or programming, and parsing of data, you're inevitably going to run into Python, which is a scripting or coding language, as well as R. And so you can also copy the R code or the Python code. Later on in this course, I'm going to show you how Einstein Discovery can generate R code for you. Very cool feature, excited to get into that. But for now, let's save these results as a CSV file to my downloads. And so I've got that in my downloads section. So now if I go back to Einstein, now I can click on the CSV file. This is once again importing CSV file. And I'm going to select off of my local drive that file and import it. This is the raw crime data for Denver. And so it's examining that, and it's going to find some improvements to the data set. And one thing I wanted to explain while we're doing that is that these improvements that Einstein Discovery finds upon import has to do with data quality. That's where there's rows with not a lot of data or columns that don't have a lot of values. And so if we review the changes here, just to reiterate, on this import, that you can do things for these improvements that it finds. It says that there's too many columns, we need to drop at least 8. I'm going to select these different columns to drop 8 of them from, and so some of these that I can safely drop that I don't need are the geocode locations. And it's saying now this increments up. I've got 5 selected. I need to drop 3 more. I want to keep the district and the precinct and the neighborhood. And let's get rid of the geolocation, and so I need to drop, it's saying 1 more. Let's get rid of the offense code. Actually, let's get rid of the incident ID. So we've dropped the columns that we need. So I'm going to ignore the time on some of these date time fields and then do nothing on others. And then I'm dropping the column on geolocation and clicking apply. And so we're going to analyze that data in Einstein. And while it's doing that, and it comes back with our 12 columns and 15,000 rows. And so if I go back to data sets, we have that now listed. And here in a little bit, I'm going to show you how to make edits to these data sets and make changes. But for now, we're going to leave that right there. And then we're going to go back to data world, and we're going to grab that trending data set around the Netflix shows. So we're going to click to open that one. Now on these particular data sets that I'm grabbing, I'm going to make those links available through the resources section of this particular lecture so you can find them later. The main gist here is you don't have to follow along exactly with the exact data sets that I use. It's just a good idea to get some additional data and get familiar with the import process at this point. And then later on in this course, we'll get to the actionable insights and how to dissect and look at the different graphs and take actions and make decisions and parse data, provide feedback, stuff like that. Some of the more involved, not necessarily complex functions of Einstein Discovery, but getting more into the actions and the insights. Right now we're just getting through the mechanics of importing data. And so now I'm in the Netflix data set on data.world, and so we've got some sample queries here that we could do. So you can click on these, and so for example, here's different movies and TV shows with rating and rating level. And I had a particular query that I built previously, so I'm going to paste that in, and this is the link that I'll give you guys in the resources section. And we'll be able to see it here in just a second as far as what the actual query looks like. And so while we're waiting on that, just one other thing to note with this particular data set with the Denver crime set, we were able to successfully import 15,000 rows of data. So I did definitely misspeak earlier. You can do under or above 10,000 rows in this version of Einstein Discovery. And so it looks like this particular query is just selecting all from this data set. So it's pulling in all the titles, the ratings. I'm going to change the query and do the limit to 10,000. And then let's run and save the query. And so then for some reason it says 1,000 query results. I'm going to go ahead and export this and see what we have and save as a CSV file. And so now I can go back to datasets. Let's do the Netflix shows query results, choose that for my local machine, and now it'll examine the data set and it'll find changes that can be made. And so we've got some suggested changes or actions. Just going to leave the defaults and do nothing, and then just click apply. There's 1,002 rows in that data set, so not a ton of data. And so now it's going to analyze the data, and it brings back our 1,000 rows now in 7 columns, and it looks like the rating, that may need to be a number, I'm not sure. I'm just going to leave it text though for now. And so you get the idea though as far as how to derive and get to some data sets beyond what's available in Trailhead by going to various websites such as data.gov or data.world, and you can peruse the different data sets and save as CSV files. And now to round out this particular lecture though, we did kind of blow through these different types of connections. I'm going to go ahead and connect to a MySQL database. I did realize that I've got access to some of those through some of the blogs I've set up on WordPress on my own hosting account. And so I'm going to enter in the connection information, and so you enter in the name, and then you enter in the host, database, etc. And you'll only be able to follow along with this if you've got access to a MySQL database. And so if you've got web hosting of some kind, you can contact support for your own web host. But if not, just follow along by just watching and don't worry about it a whole lot. So once you've entered in all the connection information for your MySQL database, click connect. And then if you've entered everything correctly, it will connect. So now I've got my MySQL example and my saved connections. It saves that automatically for future use. You can click the down arrow here to view details or delete. Viewing details shows you all the login information you just entered, or you could just click the details here, for example. But on the tables option tab it comes up to, I can select a table. And you can see, if you're familiar with WordPress, these are just different things from a WordPress install. And so I'm just going to pull in the table for my WordPress posts on whatever site this is. I'm not even sure which one I'm pulling from, but I've selected the WP_posts, and I'm going to say copy data. And this is how then Salesforce Einstein Discovery handles this, is that I've got just 11 rows of data. So I've only got 11 posts on this particular blog that this is connected to, but I did effectively pull in a data set from a WordPress instance on a MySQL database using the credentials for that MySQL database, and have imported that into Einstein. And so now if I look at this though, I'm not going to save the password. We've got the different columns, which are 12, and there's just 11 rows. And now I mentioned previously a question I had about limits. Now check this out. If I click create to create the story around this data, I get an error here saying that the data set must have at least 1,000 rows. I wanted to go ahead and show that now because I ran across that as I was getting this set up to record, in that I found that the limit in this instance, as far as a minimum number of rows that Einstein Discovery can work with, is at least 1,000 rows. And so this is not going to work from being able to create a story with this data set. And so I realized that we're just dealing with the import of data right now, but I did want to bring that out and show you just the front end of creating a story, which we'll get more into in the next section when we deal with creating stories in Salesforce Einstein Discovery. But that really rounds out the process of the different ways that you can import data and create data sets in Salesforce Einstein Discovery. And so now it's time for us to figure out how to make changes to our data sets in Einstein Discovery.